on the elevator. He had pushed 7. Door opens, 7. Oh, this is it. He comes out. Oh, there it is, the office. He arrived at the 7th floor and found Mr. Jones's office and entered. A secretary greeted him and said, "Oh, good morning and welcome." And he introduced himself. "Yes, good morning. My name is Robert Smith." She offered him to say, "Oh, Mr. Smith, please have a seat." "Yes, have a seat." Perfect timing. "Have a seat." She greeted him and offered him a seat as she went to her boss's office. He was in the next office. And she returned and said, "Mr. Jones, we'll see you now." "Oh, thank you." So he gets up and starts to go to the office. Any question about the words? Arriving at the 7th floor. Greeted, 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 introduced, offered, boss's office, returned and said, "Mr. Jones will see you now." Any questions?
Introduce, not introduce.
Introduced. I would like to introduce you, if you were speaking just as somebody right now, I would like to introduce you to my friend. Introduce you to my friend. And then later, did you introduce her to your friend? "Yes, I introduced my friend to her." Introduce, introduced. Present tense, introduce. I am introducing. I will introduce you right now. Yesterday, I introduced you to my friend. Introduced.
I always introduce. I pronounce introduce.
Introduce, okay, right. Well, that's okay, it's pretty close. Pretty close. Introduce, introduce. I will introduce you to my friend. I introduced you to my friend. Any other questions? Entered, greeted, greet, offered, returned, introduced. Arriving, not arriving, arriving at the 7th floor, arriving. No other questions? Secretary. Secretary. He is the Secretary General of the Commission. The Secretary General. She is my secretary. Secretary.
Not secretary.
Secretary. Secretary. My secretary will see you to the office. Secretary. Secretary. Just think of it, secretary. 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 Any other questions? Secretaries? Okay, there we go. Introduced. Introduced. Okay. Secretary.
ใช่แล้วก็ secretary กับ secretary แล้วก็ secretary
The Secretary of State. The Secretary of State. Let me try this. Okay, there's little words in here, a little different, you might not have run into before. Mr. Smith rose and entered the office. where he was greeted by Mr. Jones with a firm handshake and hearty welcome. He was asked to take a seat. The two exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes. And then Mr. Jones reached for the resume on his desk. Reached for the resume on his desk. Resume. Mr. Smith rose and entered the office where he was greeted by Mr. Jones with a firm handshake and hearty welcome. He was asked to take a seat. The two exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes. And then Mr. Jones reached for the resume on his desk. Okay.
Mr. Smith rose and entered the office where he was greeted by Mr. Jones with a firm handshake and hearty welcome. He was asked to take a seat. The two exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes, and then Mr. Jones reached for the